another thing too is like having money that's actually worth something, backed by something. So before, when money was on the gold standard, you could make long-term decisions. Now, one of the big like reasons that the economy is such a shit show is like nobody can make long-term decisions anymore. You don't know what your cash is going to be worth.
Welcome to the Cash Flow Chronicles. I'm your host, Jonny and the founder of Catani Capital Group. For the last 2 years, I've been studying alternative assets and now help solve the problem of creating passive cash flow for creators, influencers, and busy professionals by bringing you 5 episodes a week of easy to understand education in the world of passive investing. What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Cash Flow Chronicles. I'm your host, Jonny, and I'm joined today by Elizabeth Duffy. Elizabeth is a libertarian comedian, host of the Taxes podcast, and a digital creator on all platforms, which we will certainly get into. Elizabeth, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm excited to chat.
Likewise. Does everyone call you Elizabeth? Do you have a nickname?
It's usually Elizabeth.
Elizabeth. Yeah. Okay. Elizabeth it is. Cool. Well, primarily we have real estate investors on here. So it's nice to get a change of pace. We're going to talk about some totally different things today, but give us a kind of rundown of, your background, what your life's been like kind of leading up to this point. You're the ripe old age of 30. Welcome to the 30s. And, kind of what's created what you are so far.
Yeah. So like the basis of my content is libertarianism, or just kind of like personal sovereignty, freedom based shit. And can I swear on here?
Yes, you're good.
Okay. I should ask that prior, but that kind of stuff really. And so basically how that started was I grew up in the Rust Belt. So like heavy poverty stricken kind of area, and you kind of learn to hate the government growing up like that, because you see all the shitty policies and how it impacts like people of the lower class, and like just the ridiculous economic policies, just all of it. And so I was really passionate about that. And I don't know, in my early 20s, I just started kind of making political satire, like based around libertarianism on TikTok, just for like shits and gigs. And it kind of took off from there. So I do that. And then I also branched out. I do other comedy too. That's like not specific to libertarianism, but that's kind of where my heart's at. And my podcast too is like based around, personal sovereignty, taxation is theft, roads, the kind of quintessential libertarian stuff.
That's awesome. I love it. I've got 2 of my mentors are part of Liberland. Are you part of that?
Mm-mm.
Okay. Are you aware of it? Like,
no, tell me.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know a ton about it. I was kind of hoping that you just knew what it was. But it's centered around libertarianism, that same philosophy, right? Kind of it's funny. Grew up conservative, right? Come from a conservative household, tend to lean more conservative in most things, more progressive, right? Like there's nothing for the middle. That's the problem that we've come up against. I don't want to get super political here, but, I know you probably feel the same way, where like, there's just nothing, especially now it's so polarizing. Like you have to choose one side or the other. So what has it been like to kind of stand out and kind of hold that ground?
Yeah, it's not great. You're definitely right. It has become like hyper polarized, and this kind of like extremist insanity where you have to be like super far one way or the other. I'm like, I don't know, I'm pretty hopeful, and like I'd say I'm like white pilled on it, I think a lot of people are kind of opening their eyes to like, no, we don't have to be like far left, far right. We can, well, far right is like a term I feel like that's been taken over anyway, where like if you're just kind of remotely conservative, they're like, you're far right. But because I get called far right and I'm like a libertarian, so it's pretty nuts. But I think more people are opening their eyes to like, hey, no, like we just kind of want to be left alone. Like decentralization is growing big time. I think crypto has had like a huge impact on kind of people's thought process around not only money, but like everything. Because once you kind of realize like decentralization works really well economically, then you start to like put it into all these other scopes, I think.
Yeah, I completely agree. And unfortunately, crypto is getting dragged through the mud right now.
Mm.
But I think that it's sort of the kind of the necessary dip that happens, like nobody knew about it, then it absolutely exploded, right? And when you go up that high, right, you have to come down. And I feel like that's what's happening, and the market's kind of recentering. And I'm not a big crypto person, so please don't let me I don't want to mansplain here, because it's absolutely, I'm just using, like, I
No,
worked
you
in the
can just
stock market.
explain. I don't tie
I
your
worked in the
gender
stock
to.
market. I worked in, I do real estate. So everything's kind of cyclical, and it just feels like where we're at in the cycle. But from what I understand, the government's kind of headed towards a crypto style currency, digital currency, I should say. So your big thing is kind of like being left alone. What is your lifestyle right now, so that you kind of really keep yourself away from all of that?
Yeah, so and not only me just being left alone, but I'm really big on like leave everyone alone, unless they're
Yes.
hurting anybody else, like leave everybody alone. And that's one of the things like tying it back to like what I said, how I grew up and what I think is actually more empathetic towards poor people or people who don't have a lot of money is kind of this whole deregulation, letting people be able to climb the ladder and have that have that movement instead of like regulating it away, which I feel like we do big time. So with what I do, I don't know. I'm just out here like trying to convince more people to be into decentralization, to be into deregulation, to be into actual free market capitalism, and recognize like socialism doesn't work, cronyism doesn't work, and the best possible situation is this kind of like free market, personal sovereignty based system.
I completely agree. The irony, and maybe not so ironic part about it, and I've heard you talk about this on your podcast, is we all actually kind of want the same thing. That's the funniest part about it, right? Like, more affordable healthcare would work for everybody, whether
Mm-hmm.
you're rich or poor, especially the lower class, right? And more affordable and more accessible healthcare, right? More accessible mental health care would be a great start. I'm pretty sure if you did a poll, of 1,000 people, most would agree that lobbying needs to. Personally, I think if you got rid of lobbying, you'd probably cure about 30% of the issues we deal with. But what seems to be the biggest battle? Like, where is the most contention, and why does it seem like we can't sort of agree, despite the fact that we all want the same things?
Yeah, well, so it's almost like kind of a marketing thing. You know what I mean? It's like it's the weaponization of empathy. So when it comes to like the left, they are genuinely empathetic, and but they think that they're the only ones that are empathetic. And so they think that because you have a different way of coming to a solution to help poor people, for example, that you don't care about poor people. And they're like, no, just all these handouts, that's the empathetic way. And I'm over here like, no, actually, freedom is the empathetic way. Like, all these regulations keep them from being able to start up businesses. You have like regulations that keep people from day trading, even like the $25,000 day trader rule or whatever. That doesn't help poor people, but that's the kind of explanation, right? It's like, oh, mommy and daddy government know best. So, if you don't have this amount of money, you're not allowed to do it. You can't play the game because you're too dumb and you'll lose all your money. And those are the kind of things that I don't think are actually empathetic towards poor people. And especially coming from like a poor community, I've actually seen how it plays out. And people on the left are like, no, I'm empathetic because I want handouts. And then people on the right are empathetic also in their own way, but usually it comes from maybe like a more religious background or something along those lines. But they also care about people. It's just everybody is coming up with different solutions. I just happen to think the free market is the best way.
I completely agree. And it's fascinating because it feels like people want regulation, or want these free handouts, and, sort of hide behind the guise of empathy until it's in their backyard, right? And then you get NIMBYism, right? Which is why, to kind of come into my territory here with real estate, is there's a huge push in the industry for low income housing. But, and the irony though is that the red tape that's in place is bureaucratic. Like, it's cities being like, hey, we need more affordable housing, but behind closed doors, they're the ones who won't allow the affordable housing and make it so difficult for anybody to build any kind of low income housing or anything affordable. And so you have this like sort of battle where a part of you wants to help, but also there's not really any money in it. And so it's like, well, how am I supposed to help if I can't even help myself? So that's kind of what we're running into in the industry, right? Especially now as we're coming up on these economic times, there's a big, a big asset class or mobile home parks, right? But the very cities are the ones that won't allow you to develop and build these mobile home parks, despite, you go into these parks and these are just regular people. They just have a job. They just do normal things. They just happen to, perhaps not make quite as much, or some choose that lifestyle. And we keep running into these battles. And what ends up happening is, like you kind of alluded to, nothing gets done. We just end up kind of right back where we're at.
Well, yeah. Excuse me. Sorry. Yeah, no, it turns into this kind of just like show of empathy, but they don't really do anything. So basically it's like, no, yeah, we want this and we want that, but they're not actually doing anything. It's the same thing with taxes or whatever. It's like, oh, we all should be paying more taxes so that we can have all of these social programs. And it's like, well, you could just write a check to the IRS. You know that, right? Like you could just write off, like send them 70% of your income if you want. Like if you truly genuinely believe in that, but they don't. Like how many progressives, actually like send a 70% of their income check to the government? They don't. And so that's what it boils down to, is kind of just this game of like, we're going to say this stuff and pretend and blah, blah, blah. And then you have the other side that comes in and they're like, yeah, we're not actually going to let that happen though. And they're like, oh, okay, that's fine. As long as I can just run around and say it. So yeah, it's kind of this game of not actually helping anyone. And again, like deregulation would solve the majority of these problems, like not allowing people to buy off the government, not allowing people to play like those sort of games would help everything. And people can decide where they want to live. If they don't want to live in a community that has low income housing, that's fine. Vote with your feet kind of thing. Like that's where the free market comes in.
Absolutely. I love that. And it is, I think a lot of people forget, but we're really not that far removed from a very decentralized government. It wasn't until really around the Great Recession, or what was the one in 29 or whatever. But that's really when government started to really step in. Before that, we had a pretty free-ish system. You may be able to speak better on that, but from what I understand, right? And then, of course, the Federal Reserve was created, and ever since then, I'm not sure if you read The Creature from Jekyll Island, but
I haven't yet, but that keeps coming up. It's on my to-do list.
Yeah, it's a really good book. But ever since then, of course, the system now is what it is, and it's just become more and more corrupt. And it feels like what society wants, especially the far left, is they really want that easy fix, and there really is not an easy fix. It's a systemic fix, right? It feels like at this point there's only one way to fix it, and that's to just upend the whole thing.
Well, yeah, the problem, I think this is kind of like a human problem too, is like, well, we're already dealing with the current thing and we already like know we can handle it or whatever. So switching over to something else that has remotely one problem is like freaky, right? It's like, well, it's not perfect. And the thing is nothing is perfect. So that's kind of the issue. Like when you start talking like politics or anything, people are always like, well, it doesn't work perfectly this way. And it's like, of course, like, no, it doesn't work perfectly. That's why you have to argue from reasons like, I don't know, what's just, like personal sovereignty is just. So, that's why. And it still comes with like pros and cons, of course. Like the world it's never going to solve like everything. You're never going to have zero problems. Like you're saying, like you're still going to have people upset when low income housing comes in, but then other places you're going to have people upset that there's no low income housing. You know what I mean? But those things have to work themselves out, just like on an individual level. And that's the most fair way to do things. And it's also the best way to do things when you want to talk economics, like not having regulation involved and just being able to freely and consensually have an economy go that way is so much better for everyone.
Absolutely. We were kind of talking earlier about crypto and how things go in cycles, and the economy is no different, right? Everything goes in a cycle. And I feel like, especially now, so many, especially, the government specifically, is trying to interrupt that cycle and sort of force it to do something, despite, if you look back through history, it just always naturally kind of does what it's supposed to. And like you said, the free market will take care of itself. Right now, are there going to be things that go wrong? Of course, right? Nothing is perfect. It's going to go wrong. It has to. That's how things get corrected.
Yeah, especially with the mess that has been created at this point. Like I think that's the scary thing for people is it's a big one. I heard someone, I don't remember who it was, but like someone compared it like the economic cycle basically to like at some point you have to have the hangover. It's like when you're drinking a bunch, like at some point you have to have the hangover. And when you have like the Fed involved and everything, it's like they want to just push the hangover off by just like, it's like, keep drinking. It's okay. I'll just keep drinking. I'll keep drinking. And it's like, no, eventually you have to have the fucking hangover. And when you just let it naturally happen, it happens a lot quicker, but it's a lot shorter and it's not as bad. And like you said, it's cyclical. It's always going to happen. But when you keep like bumping it up and bumping it up, you've created this like bigger and bigger and bigger bubble. Basically, you created a worse hangover. And so like, that's what we have looming. So people are like, no, just keep drinking. Like we just don't have to think about it. Just keep drinking. And it's like, yeah, the realists are like, ooh, this isn't going to be good.
Yeah, that's so funny. That's such a hilarious analogy because, how many times have you done that on a weekend, and you're like, oh, well, you know what? Just keep going. It'll be fine. And then by Monday, you're like,
yeah, it's going to hit you eventually.
Correct. I love that. No, that's a really, really great point. And that is exactly what is happening. And for those who are kind of at least, paying attention, right? I don't expect everyone to be as diehard. Like I'm kind of a hobby economist. I really enjoy it. By no means, do I claim to be any kind of expert, but it feels like something is coming. Like it feels like something's going to break, and I don't want to say catastrophic, but it feels like it's been too easy so far. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely fall more into like the Austrian economics, obviously, PAC being the quintessential libertarian that I am. But I 100% agree with you. I think it's going to be really nasty. There just doesn't seem to be a way around it. And yeah, there's so many issues, and I don't really know how they're going to fix it. Like when you were talking about the government moving towards like a cryptocurrency based economy, I don't love that either. Like I'm a fan of decentralization, and I think crypto was a huge part of like waking people up to that. But what the government would be doing with just digitalizing currency, which it already basically is, not excited about that. But basically something has to happen because we can't just keep going on like this, or we'll end up like, I don't know, Venezuela or whatever.
When you look back through history, it feels like we're kind of headed to where the US has to be doomed. We've been such a great world power, but everything has taken its turn from falling from the top, and we haven't in a while. And that makes me really nervous, because when you look at the decision makers and the decisions that they're making, there's just no logic anymore, right? It's very, very tied to who's in their back pocket and who's paying them the most. That's why I kind of made that comment about lobbying, where I think, if we got rid of lobbying, I think we could fix a lot of things, because it would force people to make a decision based on what's actually the best decision. And it doesn't feel like the government is for the people anymore. And I would imagine you completely agree with that.
Yeah, no, I don't think the government has been for the people in a very long time, unfortunately. I'm a little bit more white pilled about it though. Like I think decentralization would help out big time. And I think people are literally talking on mainstream media about national divorce. So to me, like I don't know, that's like a positive sign. Actually, it's like people going, hey, like this is not working. Whether or not you're pro national divorce or not, like people are like, hey, this isn't working and we need to fix something. So I think that's actually a positive thing. I don't think it's gonna like, I don't think Americans will let it just completely fall apart and turn like into absolute chaos. I don't think it's gonna happen.
No,
I have hope.
Right. I agree. It is fascinating because if we all stood up, we could overpower anything. It's just, right now with us all battling each other, especially the red versus blue, the government's going to keep winning, right? Because we can't even decide what we want. So we keep letting them make the decisions for us. And the only thing we can say is, well, I don't agree with that. Well, okay, you got to go do something about it. So all right. Well, we got pretty political despite.
I'm sorry. I haven't. No. That's what I do.
It's totally great. I love it because we completely agree here. And it is a nice change of pace. I do want to touch a little bit on some finance stuff, but you did make a couple references. What's white pill? Explain that. I do not know that reference.
Oh yeah. Sorry. So it's like white pill is like having hope and like being positive. So the red pill, blue pill from the Matrix. Yeah. Then you have like white pill, which is like your pill of hope, and black pill, which is like it's all doomed, we're all going down, like the ship is sinking. So I tend to be white pilled on it. Like I have hope that things are gonna move in a positive direction. So yeah, that's.
I love it. Okay, awesome, cool. Then I would agree. So let's kind of touch now. We talked offline. Despite, I did not grow up poor, very, very blessed the way I grew up, upper middle class. But despite that, still public educated, didn't have financial education. Have you, obviously you're big in the libertarianism, taxes. Have you also included kind of personal finances and understanding, there are a lot of incentives. I shouldn't say a lot, but there are incentives in the IRS codes to help avoid taxes, right? Like you have an LLC, you can take expenses from the LLC and blah, blah, blah. So have you educated yourself there as well to help kind of, solidify your stance on things?
Yeah, a bit. So, like you said, like definitely no financial education. And then I didn't have like a family that knew anything about finance either. So basically I was like 21 or something like that. And I was drunk, and this podcast is going to make me sound like an alcoholic, but I was drunk. And I like the new starts. The Fox Business was like on or whatever, and there's all those like numbers and shit at the bottom, and I was like, I just realized I don't know what that means. I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know, like, I was like, what are those arrows, why, like blah blah blah. So I basically was like, I'm going to teach myself the stock market, and I did. And so I taught myself like as much as I could, and then I've also owned like I think 4 businesses now up to this point, like mostly just small e-commerce. Couple worked, couple didn't. So I learned a lot through there. And then on top of that, I also got into like crypto trading and stuff like that, which helped me. And then I just hired like an accounting team and stuff like that. So I offshoot a good portion of it. But their, goal is the whole like pay, like, I'm paying as little taxes I can and shit like that. So basically it was just kind of the school of hard knocks way. I just kind of dove in and started trying stuff and learned kind of slowly. So by no means an expert, but definitely know more than probably like anybody in my family at this point.
Yeah, it is fascinating when you learn, and I think that everyone should have a basic understanding of the stock market, and maybe not necessarily specifically like individual stocks, but just understanding how the market works, because whether you like it or not, that is a pretty good indication of what's happening economically, right? Because you have so many different publicly traded companies, some, what they call cyclical, right? Go with the regular cycle, you're counter cyclical, right? And so you can get a good understanding of what's happening based on, just a little bit of information from the stock market, if you know what to look for. And, I worked firsthand in the market, was a really eye-opening experience to see that money's not real, because it's very manipulated in the stock market, as I'm sure you know. And you mentioned day trading. Did you try your hand at day trading?
Oh, heck yeah.
Do you still day trade?
I haven't been able to keep up with it, but yeah, crypto day trading was my thing for a
Oh,
hot
crypto.
minute.
Okay. So
Yeah.
explain that to me then, because like I mentioned before, I'm not super familiar with crypto. I kind of missed the boat there and I'm just waiting for things to make a little bit more sense. So explain the trading. It's just like the stock market where you just buy and sell.
Yeah, basically. And so I traded off like public sentiment basically. And I would just like, so it's so like I don't know what to call it. Like definitely new agey or whatever, but basically like hopping on. So I was on like Reddit before the whole GameStonk thing happened. And kind of Reddit and Twitter and seeing like what people were talking about and blah blah blah. And it was actually like I don't want to say it was like too easy, but back then it was like it was pretty easy to figure out what was going on. And yeah, you just buy and sell just like you would a stock and trade it just like you would a stock. So it was basically the same thing.
Interesting. And then because it's decentralized, there's no, like how you mentioned before, the 25,000 minimum to actually be a pattern day trader, right? Now you can day trade to a certain extent without that, so on and so forth. But there's no regulation. So there's no minimums. You can just you can go as many round trips as you want.
Yeah, basically. So that was kind of like the big appeal to crypto, especially when it first, well, I don't want to say when it first came out, but when it first got big, like when people first knew about it. Because I remember my brother like called me at like 2 a.m. one time, like back in the day, and he was like trying to tell me what Bitcoin was when it was at like $1,500. And I was like, Kyle, I can't fucking handle this shit. I don't know. That sounds crazy.
Meanwhile, had you invested back then, probably be wherever you wanted.
Yeah, I was pretty pissed, but it is what it is.
Yeah, I mean, listen, we could all be millionaires in hindsight, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how many times have you missed something? And it's funny because when you're in the market, it feels like working in it. It feels like you shouldn't have the pulse on it and know. And I did do well. I day traded. Ultimately, ended up losing more than I made day trading because I would try to trade on instinct, and I only laugh because that's a terrible way to trade. There's no rhyme or reason to it because there's no rhyme or reason to the market. It can be manipulated very quickly, which is why I switched gears to real estate because it's a lot more stable asset. It doesn't ebb and flow so dramatically. So I'm curious, is real estate on your radar? Is that something you'd like to do because, you're kind of anti-tax and there are a lot of incentives, there's homesteading, of course, there's depreciation, different things like that.
Yeah, so I haven't gotten super into real estate and it wasn't anything like huge on my radar or anything I was really interested in, to be honest with you, actually, until this recent, like, I don't know what you want to call it. So basically when I was looking for a house, it like it was looking like really weird for me and I didn't understand anything because the market was like going crazy. This was like at the whatever, like with the, I don't know if I can say anything on here, like the schmandemic. Can I say that?
Pandemic? Are you talking
okay.
about COVID? Yeah, you can talk about the pandemic.
I can say that. Oh, okay.
Is that a curse word?
Well, some people are so weird and like don't like if they put it on YouTube or whatever, they're like, don't fucking bring it up. But anyways, yeah, so like the COVID thing and the housing market started going crazy, right? And so, anyways, I like didn't know anything about like real estate at the time. And I was talking to a realtor and I was like, okay, so the market's like crazy here. Where's it not crazy? And they're like, it's crazy everywhere. And I was like, huh. And they said, because people are moving out of the city. And I was like, okay, like, all right, cool. So shit's cheap in the city. And he was like, no. And I was like, oh, that doesn't make any sense. And then he was like, well, people are moving from other states. And I was like, sweet. So what states are cheap right now? And he was like, none. And I was like, that doesn't make any fucking sense to me. Like, supply, that doesn't make any sense. So then I got like super interested in that because and I asked him, I was like, that doesn't make any sense, right? And he was like, I guess not. And I was like, yeah, like, how have you not thought of that? And so then I started researching it and started to find out about like BlackRock and these big like investment firms that were like buying up it. I had no idea about anything at the time because it wasn't like news yet. And I was like, that's crazy. So that's what kind of got me like down the rabbit hole of like real estate. And I'm much more interested in it now. but it was just kind of like by happenstance because stuff just wasn't making sense to me. And I thought it was so confusing.
Yeah, you nailed it right on the head. Honestly, it makes no sense right now. What's happening is there's so much just capital available, right? You have your institutions like BlackRock. You even have individual investors who've just made so much money over the years because, with tech, and really what it came down to is, you have the public sector and you have the private sector, right? Public is, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, like all that stuff, right? That you relate to like the stock market. And then you got the private world, which is, businesses before they go public, right? So all your tech startups, you've got, the apartment, like if you live in an apartment complex, that's a private security. Apartment complexes, when you, depending on how you buy them, it's actually regulated by the SEC, despite being a private, what they call private placement. And what's happening is exactly what you just described. Because institutions now can put their hand in everything, including going and buying, right? So they have access to so much more data than we do, that whenever a little tiny blip, and because they're trading in so much money, 1%, 0.5% can be hundreds of millions of dollars to them, 0.5% in one direction, they're putting money into that thing. So what's happening is we have this like sort of overinflated market that's just being propped up by nothing. And all it takes is for someone to just pull the rug out and it's gone. And you're seeing it in housing. I mean, Zillow announced they're going to buy like $1 billion worth of single family homes.
Really?
How's anybody supposed to buy a house?
That is crazy. Well, what's really weird to me too, like, so I don't know how much like into this kind of stuff you get, but like also the whole buying up a bunch of houses. So I'm in Detroit. So like this happens a lot in Detroit because there's so many like old dilapidated houses here. Basically they'll like buy up a bunch and then just kind of like slowly pepper them out, so you don't have a bunch for sale at the same time, bringing the price down. And so you also have like things like that, especially in like kind of more rundown type communities, which it's nuts. The people who don't make a lot of money trying to like buy a house right now, or even trying to rent a house, because rent prices are also insane, because people also bought houses at really high prices and then they need to have higher rent. It's just nuts. I don't understand how it's going to keep going. The car market's the same way. You know what I mean? Like trying to like have a car payment right now is nuts. Like compared to like when I was a teenager, I'm looking at it and I'm like, I don't know how like the average like teenager is supposed to get a car right now. It's nuts.
Interest rates are through the roof and prices still have not really come down enough. Like I'm in Salt Lake City. I'm still, I bought my house 4 years ago. At one point it was nearly double. It's come down, but still not as much as you think it should. And that's why I mentioned earlier, it feels like something big is coming, because at least with 08, it just like, we knew what it was, right? Housing, there's all this issue. And of course, when you really get into the weeds of it, you see, it was obviously global, but we figured it out. Here, there's nothing that's like giant red siren going off like, hey, there is a big, big issue here. One to pay attention to is corporate debt. That a lot of corporate debt's going to be coming due over the next 12 to 18 months. That could be a big one, especially in the public markets. But, there's not really anything that's like, hey, this should be broken by now. And the Fed only has one lever. They just have the raising of the interest rates. So they're just going to keep raising interest rates till something breaks. And like I said, I'm more of a hobbyist, so I'm not really sure what's going to happen. But from a pure investment standpoint, they're not any good deals right now. They're very, very challenging to find. And I can only imagine being a first-time home buyer and looking at like, okay, you're going to get a 6.5% interest rate. And oh, by the way, prices are still 20% higher than they were 3 years ago. You're like, that's crazy. 3 years ago, it was a 3% interest rate. So I don't know.
Yeah, it's insane. Inflation is like the worst tax there is. It's horrible.
Yeah, it is. Do you feel that that can be combated with decentralization? Like, how do you think those two kind of correlate?
Oh, for sure. Like, well, what you were talking about, the whole Keynesian economic version of just pull the lever and raise inflation rates is, I mean, it's one way to deal with the economy, but it's a terrible, terrible way for poor people, because you're basically just trying to crush demand by making people not be able to afford anything. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah, the demand has gone down, great. That slows inflation, but that's because nobody can buy anything. You know what I mean? Because everybody's spending all of their money on eggs. It's insane. It's just insanity. But when you just have a true like free market, the stuff ebbs and flows, but it's not these insane like manipulated crashes or anything like that. It's like, you know, way more chill and just happens naturally kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah, that makes perfect sense.
And
Now,
you can also, not to interrupt, but you can also have like more local economy. Like, you know what I mean? Like when you're decentralized, you can be more locally focused, and that way, like what the Fed is doing isn't impacting you. You know what I mean? Like you live in a state that has a great economy, awesome, like that's booming, and things can work a lot differently in that aspect. Is when you make it into one big giant thing, like globalism, tying the global economy together, if something happens, everybody goes down. Like that's what happens when you tie everything together like that.
yeah, absolutely. And that's what you're starting to see, you know, when every country is loaning money to each other, and it's just a twisted web of, you know, who owes who what. Meanwhile, you've got people, like you said, on the lower end of, you know, the income, and they're just trying to make ends meet. And it feels so. My question would be, how much are they paying attention? Are they just, you know, the lower middle class, and even the even poor people, are they paying attention, or are they so focused on making ends meet that they're not really feeling it, or do they feel it even more?
No, they're definitely feeling it. They're definitely feeling it, and they're definitely like they pay attention. I don't know, like paying attention to what specifically are you asking?
Yeah, I guess that's a good question. So, well, first of all, nobody should be paying attention to mainstream media. So whether you're rich or poor, please stop paying attention to mainstream media, because the sky had fallen a couple years ago. So I guess, so how much do increased interest rates affect, right? Because I, like you mentioned, the price of eggs have now come back down, it feels like, at least on my end. So where do they feel it the most? Let's start there. Where do they feel it the most when things kind of start to tighten up like we're seeing?
Yeah, definitely. So, with poor people in like poor communities and stuff, from what I found and what I still see, because you know, like my whole family is still, you know, living in poor communities, and the first thing that hits is like your grocery bill. You know what I mean? It's like the stuff that you have to pay right now. So groceries have been a huge one. And seeing the inflation there, gas is also a huge one. It's all these things that they're barely scraping by on anyway. So their grocery bill going from like $150 a week to 200 is a huge fucking deal. You know what I mean? That's a huge deal. Or gas going up 50 cents is a huge deal. Um, it's just a different, it's just different. Like I remember like, I used to always know the price of gas, like down to like the cents and stuff, or like people in my family would be like, oh, you go to that one because they're like 3 cents cheaper. It's just a totally different, like I'll be honest with you, I don't even know the fucking price of gas now. Like to the, you could be like, yeah, the dollar, it's a different, I know, I feel it's a different lifestyle when you come out of it and you're like, oh, wow, there's people out here who don't know the price of gas. Like I did not know that growing up. Like I did not know that was even a thing. But it's 100% a thing. So like literally to the dollar, people are scraping by. So it's the everyday like necessities that hit them first. And then it's other things that they don't have to get all the time. But like I said, like a car or something like that. So something happens to their car and then they have to go, and then holy shit, this is insane. I can't afford this. You know what I mean? Like I had like a $300 a month car payment before, and now like I can't get anything less than $500 a month, and it's like not doable for them. So it's stuff like that.
They feel inflation. Okay, so that's
totally
where I go. Yeah, so they feel inflation. I was focused too much on interest rates. It's the inflation that crushes. And, you know, despite being out of it, like, you know, I didn't grow up poor, but I have been poor. I mean, I was a college kid and, you know, worked full time, blah, blah, blah. Like I remember one time I had to literally use the change in my truck to put gas in my truck, and it wasn't even like a full gallon. I had enough to like.
You've been broke.
Thank you. That's better. Yeah. But that was literally the day before payday. So I just had to like make it to payday. So yes, thank you. I've been broke. And so yes, you do. And you start to kind of count that, right? And it's very material when it starts to kick in. And yet here we are. And it doesn't seem like pulling this one single lever is even doing anything anyway. What, you know, in your circles, right, libertarian, what are kind of some, you know, decentralization is a big one. What are some other kind of key points that you guys try to push for that can help? Is there anything that can help bring poor people out of poverty?
Well, like, yeah. So definitely like the free market. Solutions. And then another thing too is like having money that's actually worth something, backed by something. So before, when money was on the gold standard, you could make long-term decisions. Now, one of the big like reasons that the economy is such a shit show is like nobody can make long-term decisions anymore. You don't know what your cash is going to be worth like years from now. It's stupid to just hold on to it. It's not going to, like before, when it was backed by gold, you knew that it was going to bare minimum hold value. You know what I mean? Or, you know, appreciate. But now, like, you're like, this is not going to hold value or appreciate. It's going to depreciate. So people are making like really short-term decisions, including like big, huge, giant businesses are making these insanely short-term decisions, which is terrible for people in the long term, obviously. So having money that can actually be utilized for long-term goals lifts people out of poverty. You know what I mean? Because they actually have the ability to save and advance and make longer term investments and things like that without aren't as risky, and it's not as crazy because their money is actually still going to be worth something. So that's a huge one. Also deregulation and allowing people to start businesses without all these like insane regulations. That's a huge one. It also boosts local economies. You know what I mean? When you can go out and start a business and it's not insanely expensive. Or another issue too is like people just don't really have the education on how to do it anyway. But doing all these things that are like decentralized and free market end up helping people who are poor.
Yeah, I love that. That is, that's a huge kind of talking point, because it's just a never ending cycle down there when you're at that level that you just, you know, you work hard. And again, this kind of comes full circle to the taxes, right? The harder you work, the more you get taxed. So I know you have the podcast. Are you obviously an advocate? Are you in circles, and whether it's poverty, whether it's other, you know, we'll talk about it, right? You're an OnlyFans creator. Are you out there trying to help educate on these financial issues and help people understand like, hey, maybe you're making more money than you've ever had before. Here are some things you can do. Or what does that kind of look like?
Yeah. So I don't like educate like that as much as I probably should. And that's a good point. Like I probably should like,
I didn't mean to call you out. I just was.
No, it's fine. I'm a terrible fucking person. But no, so I do focus more on like just trying to show people the very basics of like you know, free market capitalism is actually empathetic towards poor people, and personal sovereignty is empathetic, and all like that's kind of my focus, as opposed to being like, hey, you have a bunch of money, you should put it here.
Right. That's
But
fair.
yeah, so I kind of like focus on like a step or two before that probably. But that's a good
I love
point.
that.
I maybe should, maybe dive a little deeper into things from people. I do have a War on the Poor series that I just started on my podcast. And so that's going to be something that I continue on. So maybe I'll throw some like something like that in there. Maybe I'll have you on and you can tell people where to put their money.
I love that. I'm not a financial advisor, but what we do is this was a big thing. So I was licensed. I was a licensed stockbroker, but wasn't licensed to give advice. So we educate.
Yeah, I'm
Right?
sorry.
You
Educate.
use things. You use words like typically. This is how it works, right? Typically, when you buy low and sell high, there's a gain, right? There's loopholes to it, but no,
Yeah.
I know what you're saying. I would absolutely love to, because the way that I see it is, I know growing up upper middle class, I didn't have financial education. So that absolutely means that, below the poverty line, at the poverty line, there absolutely is none. And it's not to say that, they have disposable income, because if they did, then, they wouldn't be considered poor. But it feels like there's something that can be done, right? And really what I'm trying to discover is, how can I help do that? And so elaborate on your War on the Poor and kind of what that big push is.
Yeah, so that is more like a series on kind of explaining how the government and overregulation and stuff like that actually harms poor people. But wow, I just lost my train of thought. What were you just saying? Because I wanted to make another point.
Well, I was talking about War on the Poor, but before that, I was talking about financial education.
Oh,
and
what you should, how you can help. Yeah. So one of the big things that I think doesn't get talked about enough, and a lot of people like you, how you were like, oh, they don't have disposable income because they're poor or whatever. But one thing that you can help them with, and one thing that was a huge thing for me, is you're definitely like, I don't want to say like programmed and bring up the matrixy thing again and sound all crazy conspiracy theorist, even though I am.
No, we could go and we could have a whole podcast just on that. So.
Oh, okay, cool. Well,
you're in good company here, I promise.
Good deal. So poor people are definitely programmed to look at money, not actually how you're supposed to look at money. You know what I mean? And so like there's
That's
huge,
what I was trying to uncover. Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's like this huge education gap there. Like it's so lame, but literally like Rich Dad, Poor Dad, when I read that like in my early 20s, I was like, holy shit, like this is like spot on. Like it's 100% accurate. Like you're definitely taught how to look at money in like such different terms as to people even in like the middle class are, you know what I mean? And then upper class even goes like a step beyond that for sure. But like in poor communities, they don't even know how money works. They don't know where money comes from. They don't like the actual logistics of it. You know what I mean? They're like the government, you know what I mean? Like they don't understand anything. They don't understand the Fed. They don't understand interest rates. They don't understand Keynesian economics, none of it. And so just kind of the basics of how an economy works even, or how money works, would be like huge. Like, because you just start to look at things differently and then you start to make different decisions. So a lot of like poor people make decisions like not stupidly, you know what I mean? It's based on their education and their view of money. And so they're making like technically like the right decisions monetarily, but it's based on their education of money, which is completely inverted.
Wow. Fascinating. Okay. So
yeah, it's really fucked up. It pisses me off like a lot.
Yeah, that is very frustrating. Okay. Interesting. Wow. That's wild. Okay. So really you could help just with a, kind of basic financial education and helping them understand. Interesting. Okay. That's really good to know, because that is not a very challenging platform to kind of push.
No, and I feel like it gets over because it's so basic. It gets like super overlooked. It's kind of almost like what I do with libertarianism, right? Is like in the Libertarian Party, you have all these like hyper libertarian nerds who are like gonna talk to you about like HOPPA and stuff like that. And then there's me, and I'm just like, no, I'm hitting the basics, dude. I'm just like personal sovereignty. Let's talk about that. And I sound really stupid in comparison to them, but I can actually talk to people who aren't libertarians. Like I can actually speak the language and have a conversation with them. And it's more like a bridge over type of thing. And I think even with like helping poor people economically, it's the same thing as needed. People focus like hyper on the extreme of it, where it's like specific investment advice and stuff like that. They don't understand anything like that. Like what my story about when I was drunk looking at the Fox Business, I didn't understand what they were talking. Like I couldn't understand what they were talking about. I didn't understand what was on the screen. Literally none of it. It was like another language to me. Whereas like now I get all of that. I can watch Fox Business and I'm fine. But those people, they can't. You know what I mean? So just really basic shit is, I think there's actually a huge gap there. Just how an economy works.
Interesting. That's fascinating. You mentioned Rich Dad, Poor Dad. That's kind of that's like what we call the purple Bible in real estate investing, because I can't tell you, I would guess, probably 98% of my guests have mentioned their genesis moment was Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And these are people who grew up even upper middle class. Like that just shows you, despite the wage gap, the education is not far off if you're publicly educated, right? Private's different. I was not privately educated, have friends who were, and I can tell you that there's a huge disparity there, because just the way they talk, I'm like, I didn't learn that in school.
So like Lord of the Flies, you want to talk about that one? That's all I got.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Catcher in the Rye.
Yeah, that's what I got.
You're like, well, I can tell you about parallelograms.
Yeah.
Does that help?
Basically.
A squared plus B squared equals C squared. So am I rich
I still don't
now?
even understand what that means, but yeah.
I think that's the area for a triangle.
Oh, good. Sure. Good to know.
Yeah, but that's like a perfect triangle. Then you get your like hypotenuse. We won't go into it. Math, ironically enough, was actually one of my better subjects, despite my huge disdain for education. I subscribed to Mark Twain. I didn't let school get in the way of my education. So I graduated high school, went to college, didn't finish college because it wasn't for me. So had to, like you, School of Hard Knocks, just learned everything myself, read books, listened to podcasts, talked to people, invested in things that didn't work out. Some things did work out, so one thing that I noticed too is like a huge kind of separator is taking action. It feels like so many people just kind of sit and don't do anything. Is there anything like that in poor communities where it's like, hey, if you just took a little bit more action, or is it really just the fact that they don't know?
No. Okay. So this is where like the lefties will fucking eat me alive. But no, there's a lot of just not doing anything. You know what I mean? But a lot of it is, I do think actually ties back to just kind of their viewpoints on life and stuff like that. Like I was not raised in a community where it was like a positive thing to be a risk taker, where it was like a positive thing to even make super long-term futuristic plans or anything like that. You know what I mean? Just when you are in a poor community, it's definitely more about the day-to-day. It's definitely more about just like what you can do now. And also people get stuck, like, and they definitely, there's a lot of things behind it. There's a lot of like, oh, I can't leave because my family's here and I got to take care of my family or this or that. But there's a lot of prioritizing just kind of living the same life as opposed to prioritizing moving forward or trying new things or whatever. And I mean, people can get pissy about that or whatever because they like to like Disney-fy poor communities, which I cannot stand. It's like, oh, poor people are all perfect and great people. They just have a hard time. And it's like, it sounds like you've never been to a poor community. But there's a lot of that. And that's like, and I know that because I came out of that, you know what I mean? And it's like, I know that because I sent in like 100 applications and resumes to get jobs. And I worked multiple jobs when I was in high school. And like, I did all these things that nobody else around me was doing. And that's how I knew that like, no, that is an issue around here because nobody else is fucking doing this shit. And that is one of the reasons why I actually make, a decent living now, as opposed to where I come from, is because I fucking worked my ass off for it. And also now I sell pictures of my feet online, which also helps. But that was a hard work too.
God bless the internet.
but no, like all of my original businesses and stuff like that, it was because I worked my ass off for it. And I didn't know anybody else who was working 2 jobs while going to high school. I didn't know anybody like with my dad actually is a great example of this. Like he always worked these factory jobs in Western New York where I grew up, and they paid absolutely nothing. And but it was just like, you know, the family lives here and this is where we're going to live and blah, blah, blah. So we lived off of fucking no money. And then I moved and stuff like that. And I convinced him to start like looking for jobs where I was at. And he now makes more money than he's ever made in his whole life. But it was such a silly thing because it was like, you could have done this, you know, forever ago and, you know, changed your life a long time ago. But it was just zero trying is what it was. And even the trying, it was like, I had to keep kind of like, you know, throw another application in, like send your resume into another place, like just do one more, you know what I mean? Because there's a lot of this, like, well, I tried. And it's like, no, you sent in one resume. Like that's not trying. But it's prevalent in poor communities. It really is.
Interesting. Okay. So it's kind of a two-parter. It's lack of education and lack of motivation. Which
but I think the motivation is tied to the education.
Yes,
a little bit though.
They're probably mutually exclusive in that sense.
Yeah.
Where you know, if you knew more, like even if you just read Rich Dad Poor Dad and just understood kind of a little bit basic finances and be like, oh wow, I could actually improve, you know.
Oh dude, that's another thing. Like you're not going to find, and this is not, obviously we're talking in fucking generalizations. This is not everybody in poor communities by all means. There's definitely outliers, but that's another thing too. Like personal development type material and stuff like that. I literally hated people who read that kind of shit when I was growing up. I could not stand people like that. Like you, I probably would have not been able to stand you. Because it was so annoying. Like, you know what I mean? Because when you're like in it, when you're in poverty and stuff, and then you have this person come up and you're like, just change your mindset. Just go, just drink more water. And you're like, fuck you. So I totally get it. And it's funny because it took me, it was like a process. You know what I mean? It's like a slow ladder climb. And then eventually you get to the point where you become the person you hate and you're like, just change your mindset, man.
Oh man.
But I can't tell you. It's crazy. I always read fiction. I haven't read a fiction book, like, because when you're in poverty, you utilize escapism for sure. You know what I mean? And because you have the short time preference, you're like, why would I'm not going to read this. Like, I'm not going to read Rich Dad Poor Dad. I'm not going to read Think and Grow Rich. Why would I do that? So like, it's not going to help me. But if I read this like fantasy book or whatever for 20 minutes, I'm actually going to have a good time. I'm going to have a dopamine hit and it's going to feel good. Or if I play a video game, or if I go buy a fucking Mountain Dew and a pack of cigarettes, like that's why they make those choices. You know what I mean? It's a time preference thing.
Totally. I mean, there's no growth in the comfort zone, right? Which is another cliche here to just kind of add on to them. And, you know, had I told you that, you know, but what's funny is people always told me that too, right? And what's funny is we actually were pretty similar growing up, despite, you know, growing up in kind of, you know, different classes. I hated personal growth, just like you did. Change your mindset. Like so I didn't start my own business until last year, but really kind of became an entrepreneur about 2 years ago. 6 years ago. Well, I would say probably more like 10 years ago. Like if you'd have told me when I was in college, like about like if I heard anyone talk about mindset, I was like, this person has no idea what they're talking about. They're selling snake oil. Now here I am. I do cold plunges every day. I've gone alcohol sober.
Oh, good for you. Kudos.
Thank you. It's just for the foreseeable future, but you know, gone alcohol, emphasis on the alcohol too, but gone alcohol sober, right? Like go to the gym every morning, have a routine. Like I meditate, I journal, like all the shit that I hated so much. And it's like, you know, and I really do think that part of the fear, as weird as this is that it will make you better. And I think that there is something about being afraid of your potential that I don't know if society has worked that in to make us fearful, or if it's the education. or what it is, but it feels like we're afraid of our max potential.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think also there's a little bit of just like archetype in there too. Like, you know what I mean? Like some people, if they look at a mountain, they're like, I want to fucking climb that. Like instantly, they're like, I want to fucking climb that. And then other people are just like, why would I want to climb that? That's like so much work. And like, you know what I mean? And so I think there's a little bit of that involved too. But I mean, I think you can change and you can become one or the other. But inherently, I think there's a little bit of like an archetypal thing there too.
That's totally fair. And I do think you can change, right? I think we're both examples of the fact, how many times are we told people never change? Turns out that's not true.
I don't agree with that at all. I think people can change drastically if they put in the effort, for sure.
Right. It's just that I think what happens is so many people don't want to, right? That's why we're the outliers. And what's funny about being the outliers, you realize you're like, God, if only more people were like this, we'd actually be very well off in society. Not to say that you need to go out and make a bunch of money and be an entrepreneur. It's just to say that if you're a free thinker and you're open-minded and you explore things and all of a sudden become curious, all of a sudden, something that quote unquote bad happens, you kind of just are like, oh yeah, that just kind of happened, right? Things no longer become good or bad. It's just sort of a situation that you're dealing with.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's just like a path. So I think that's why it's really important to have people kind of along the path, like at every stage, you know what I mean? So like the people that can still communicate with poor people and who aren't going to just come at them and be like, change your mindset, do cold plunges, you know what I mean? Because they cannot resonate with that. And
so if I take a cold plunge tub to a poor community, it can be a no-go, huh?
No, they look at you like you're a fucking idiot. Like, but you might inspire like one out of the bunch though. You know what I mean? Like there are people like that, but in general, like people need to like one step at a time you know what I mean? And so that's why I think it's so cool that there's like people that are like doing everything from like change your basic mindset on money to like specific investment advice. And I think it's important for like every one of those steps is super important.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I love that. Well, this has been absolutely incredible. I really, really appreciate your time, all of your insight. I know the listeners will appreciate kind of the change of pace. They've probably been beat to death with real estate, but I am very passionate about it. So
yeah, nothing more peppy than politics. So that'll change it up.
Well, hopefully we gave a nice, different perspective on politics. I like to think so because it's still, while becoming more prevalent, it's still, you're very much an outlier in your stance, I think.
For sure.
Would you say that's true? Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, let's wind down here. We'll jump to the final 5. I got 5 questions I ask everybody. Best advice you've gotten from a mentor?
Ooh, you really put me on the spot here with that. I'm a slow thinker, and this is going to take me a second.
No worries.
Best advice I've gotten from a mentor. Well, yeah. Okay. So actually this one's kind of funny. I used to have a problem. This isn't going to be about like money or anything. Sorry. But I used to have a problem like dealing with negativity of other people, which would really like, it just really got under my skin and bothered me because I would just be like, I don't understand why people are so upset. You know what I mean? Or like why you would want to like put your negativity on other people, especially on like social media and stuff when I do content creation. And I ruffle some feathers being libertarian. And
no way.
Yeah. So I had somebody tell me that you like if in real life, if someone was just like yelling a bunch of like bullshit at you, would you sit there and be like, oh, I wonder if their like opinion is correct or anything like that? Or would you just be like, I need to get away from this crazy person? And I was like, oh yeah, I just want to get away from the crazy person. It's like, yeah. So like, don't take like online trolls or anything like that, like seriously. And I think a lot of us, like, even if you say, oh, it doesn't bother me or whatever, occasionally like somebody says something, you're like, oh man, cause you're like trying to create something. So it's hard when people are trying to destroy it, but that's one of the best pieces of advice I got, I think.
I absolutely love that so much. It's so true. And I'm certainly, as I start to, hit social media harder and harder with my stances, and mine are like, I'm sitting here just sort of explaining investing and finances, and people still disagree. So I could only imagine when you have as intense of a topic as you have, on the platform that you have, that, Chad doesn't really love it as much and wants to try to tell you why you're wrong. Sorry to all the Chads out there. I didn't mean to call you out like that, but it always seems like it's a Chad or a Kevin. We always joke about that. Anyway, question number 2. What is about your career that makes you feel like you're fulfilling your why?
Yeah, so definitely with I don't know, I'm just super passionate about personal sovereignty. I just really, really am. I really think it's the way to be. I don't think you're supposed to, like, nobody has the right to make you do anything. Nobody has the right to point a gun at you and say, give me your money, not even the government. And so, yeah, I don't know. I think because it's something that's like so, I'm so drawn to do and I'm so passionate about, that getting to talk about libertarianism all day is kind of like the dream for me.
I love it. That's awesome. Love to see it. Cool. So this one, obviously it's a little bit more of a real estate question, but favorite non-real estate or investment related book. You mentioned you read a lot of nonfiction now, so give us some of your favorites, 1 or 2.
Non-investment, non-real estate, you said?
Yeah.
Okay. The Awakened Ape. I read that this year. I forget who it's by because I'm horrible with names, but I recommend it to everyone. I like shove it in everyone's face. I'm obsessed. It's a great one.
Okay, adding that to the list. I love it. Sweet. If you could have any superpower, what would it be?
Oh man. It'd be really cool to I guess be invisible.
Nice.
Yeah, I would be invisible, and then just that way nobody would talk to me in public.
Do you get social anxiety?
So not like social anxiety, but I have this weird thing where I don't know if I'm like just really dumb. That might be the issue, but like people are not like that nice to me in public, or like they treat, yeah, it's weird. It's like this weird thing. Like I get people all the time who are just like, it's just mad at me for no reason. And I try to go around like in a pretty
in the
decent
grocery store, like someone will just like,
especially in the grocery store. Like,
really?
Yeah, like cashiers and stuff never like me, like off the bat. It's the weirdest thing. Like I got a vibe or something, they're like, oh, this fucking idiot. I bet she's a libertarian.
Now you got main character vibes going, where you like just assume that
is it the main character that everybody hates me? No, everybody doesn't hate me. I get in these situations where people are like, ugh, and I'm like, I get it. Like I fully get it.
Oh, that's
so yeah,
funny.
I would just be invisible and just walk out of the store with my things, and I would still pay. You know what I mean? I just like leave cash on the counter, and you just see like a floating box of like Little Debbie's leaving the store.
Listen, if someone's judging you for buying Little Debbie's, that is a projection, all right?
I don't think that's what it is. I think, do you know how some people just have a punchable face? Do you ever see like somebody in your
I've been told I have a punchable face.
See, yeah, I think that's what it is.
Yeah, I think so too. I don't want to toot our horns here, but I think sometimes people just see those who I think people sometimes might look and be like, this person has more than I have, so screw them, just looking at us. That's just pure speculation, but ironically, I run into the same issue sometimes.
I'm going to stick with it's our punchable faces, but yeah, you do you.
Oh yeah, here I am, like trying to,
try to make yourself look good.
I thought we have white pill.
Yeah,
white pill. Cool. All right. What's the best way for people to get a hold of you and learn more?
Yeah, so you can follow me on TikTok, The Elizabeth Duffy, on Instagram, The Elizabeth Duffy. Disclaimer, the Instagram is spicy though, so I wouldn't go there unless you're into that. And then my podcast is called Tax This Podcast. So on Apple, Spotify, you can find me on YouTube, Rumble. That's a new one. So yeah, help me out. That'd be great.
Beautiful. Great podcast. I have listened. I did listen to do a little research. And ironically, it made me a couple minutes late to this because I was sitting listening to your last episode, which I was we'll definitely finish. So great podcast. We will link all of those in the show notes, make it super easy for everyone. Elizabeth, thank you so much for your time. This was absolutely amazing.
Catch you later.
Thank you again for tuning in. Who do you know that wants more cash flow? Share this episode with them so you can grow your cash flow together. If you enjoyed the show, make sure you're subscribed on your platform of choice so you never miss a new episode. Go to KataniCapitalGroup.com to learn more.